Alive and Kicking on Newstalk.
An innovative scientific study from the Nutrition Research Centre in Ireland has led to a brand new patented nutritional supplement for use in patients with mild to moderate Alzheimer's. The study was led by Professor John Nolan and Dr. Rebecca Power, and Professor John Nolan joins me in studio now. John, I thought I'd better give Rebecca her due.
Oh, 100%. Rebecca is currently working in the US, actually. She's doing a Marie Curie, so a very successful postdoctoral grant, and she's continuing her work, actually following her PhD work, which she did with. We should also give due to Professor Re-MIND Alzheimer, who was the medical doctor that we worked with on this very important project.
And what about the project then? How do you choose what the subject matter is going to be in a particular study?
So in this case, it's actually the result of 2 decades of research, believe it or not. You know, my own PhD over 20 years ago now focused on the use of targeted nutrition for an eye disease called age-related macular degeneration. And essentially what we were able to do was, you know, you hear a lot, oh, good nutrition, eat well, be healthy. And essentially our science has been able to look at good nutrition and what are the micronutrients within good nutrition that are living within cells throughout the body to help the body be healthy. In our case, back then we were looking at eyesight and this disease, as I said, macular degeneration. So we were able to isolate from plants, basically, nutrients called carotenoids. And carotenoids are really wonderful. They're these beautiful coloured pigments that live all around us in nature and in food. So when you look at fruits and vegetables, for example, and you see all the beautiful colours, these are because of carotenoids. Now, what's really interesting is from the 700 possible carotenoids that are in nature, we accumulate about 20 of them in our biological systems. And in our eye, we identified that there's 3 of them. They're called lutein, zeaxanthin and mesozeaxanthin. So you won't remember that, but they're basically these plant-based carotenoids. And the reason why they're important for us is that they have what we call antioxidant properties. So they're like sunscreen inside the body. So being able to isolate those, concentrate those and deliver them to the target tissue, in the first instance the eye, and we had great success with work with 3 carotenoids where we had macuprime, which we tested in that trial, and that's now used for age-related macular degeneration. But as part of, I was funded then by the European government, the European Research Council, and as part of our work we identified that we could actually extend our work, not just from our work on eyesight, but go into the brain and brain health. And remarkably, there was a couple of experiments happening around the same time, over 10 years ago now. There was one big experiment here in Dublin led by Professor Roseanne Kenny from the TILDA programme and a scientist called Joanne Feeney, and they were looking at brain function. And around that time, we were looking at these carotenoid pigments, these pigments which we've been measuring. And very interestingly, we found, in collaboration with the TILDA study, that people in general society that have high amounts of carotenoids have really good cognitive brain function, so brain performance. And we published this work in a major journal. So we were really, really interested in this because we wanted to explore it further. So what we decided to do at that point was to engage with the University Hospital in Waterford and Rena Mulcahy, Professor Rena Mulcahy. And Rena works with patients with Alzheimer's disease because what we wanted to see was, did patients with Alzheimer's disease have enough of these nutrients? Now knowing not only are they related to cognitive function, but also individuals that have high amounts of these carotenoids in their eye, we discovered that they have high amounts in their brain. So we had a kind of an indicator of brain nutrition for the first time ever. So we spent many years actually trying to even develop the protocol to work safely with patients with Alzheimer's disease, because obviously, you know, it's very difficult to do research in that population group, you know, for consents and everything that you have to deal with. And thankfully we were able to do that. And we had a whole series of studies that have been published which basically identified in the first instance that patients with Alzheimer's disease have a deficiency in these particular micronutrients. And remember, they're plant-based, so we don't have them inside us normally, we have to consume them. So putting all of that together, essentially we resulted with an idea that we could combine these micronutrients and we could hopefully enrich them in the patients, like patients with Alzheimer's disease, that were so deficient in them. And the research question in the Re-MIND trial, which I'm here to speak about today, was could we improve in any way the symptoms of the disease. You know, people with Alzheimer's disease, as you will know, they lose themselves. You know, it's not just about the disease. It's about what Professor Mulcahy calls the story, the clinical story. Everything about the person that we once knew changes.
This is all fascinating for me because from personal experience, my dad died of dementia 2 years ago. So, you know, I know exactly what you're talking about with personal experience. And you said they lose the essence of themselves. And I think a lot of that is down to them losing their memory, their short-term memory, their long-term memory. And that's what we use to make up what we know. What's happening in the brain with Alzheimer's?
So as you put it, I mean, our knowledge is, and I learn from, I'm a scientist, so I'm not the medical doctor, so we work with the medical doctors, but what we learn is that they lose their short-term memories. So they lose their ability to create new memories. They lose their, and, you know, Professor Mulcahy explains it so take an example like reading, for example. They can see the letters, but they just can't get it out there. Or they can see the face, and they just can't put it together. So what we believe is that there's a breakdown in, you know, if you look at the brain, there's 100 billion neurons in there forming this network that is responsible for connecting all the ideas and the new memories and transferring them and locating them and then delivering them in all consciousness. And if our cells get sick, so if you think of Alzheimer's disease, for me, it's inflammation of the brain. And that's why from a scientific perspective, we believe that nutrition is important, because we now know that with nutrition, we can stop inflammation.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. I did a kind of a carers course with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, which is given free. It was an incredible resource for me and my family. And one of the things they mentioned was that people with dementia or with Alzheimer's, they can forget how to eat. So you can put a plate of food in front of them and they will forget that you know, don't need to cut the mashed potato and like that just blew my mind, that the very small things we take for granted with our cognitive function to get us through the day all starts to erode. And while we're on the topic of food, I talk about it all the time on this programme, and I feel like we've kind of lost our way with what healthy eating is, and that's why it's so fascinating with the way you're talking about it, nutrition, eating well, plant-based, because they've all started to carry real weight. How come we've lost our way with that? This
is a really interesting point, and to your point, they forget how to eat, these patients, and they also don't want to eat. That's another piece. They actually don't have the appetite that we may have, you know, to try and consume. So that is one point, and in our very first study, the first question was, well, are they deficient because they're not eating in the first place? Because remember, these are dietary of origin. But to your really important question, we've actually studied this. I'm based at the Southeast Technological University, and some of our researchers there at the Nutrition Research Centre Ireland actually focus in on what we call nutritional devolution. So, you know, there's certain antioxidants that we need in our body that are naturally present, that the body produces them. And then there's all these other ones that we absolutely need to get from food if the cells are to be protected and to work. So that's a very basic concept. So then the question is, are we getting enough from the foods that we're consuming? So the healthiest person you'll interview today, I'll tell you they're not getting enough of these particular carotenoid nutrients. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And one is that if you look at basic farming, and I'm not critical of farming or farmers, or, you know, some of the farming of late is fantastic. But when you take a crop like a tomato, which might have 700 different varieties, we're using one or two of them. So what does that mean? That means that we're isolating a plant that will grow in large amounts, large volume, and it's easy to grow, and then you make it easy for it to grow. But the net result is that plant is underproducing these valuable nutrients within the plant.
Because we've industrialised it, so we're doing it en masse. Because we can't. You can't have one farmer that provides, you know, all the different tomatoes to the supermarket. They provide one or two, and that's it, and they have their deal, and that's how they make their living. And you can understand that, but I suppose the offset of it is, I mean, I was only reading recently that a primate will eat up to 700 different plant species in a year. And we're not getting that. We're getting up, we're having a bowl of cereal, we're having a sandwich at lunch, and we're coming home and we're throwing something quick in the oven. There might be 2 veg on the plate. Yeah. That's not enough.
No, it's not. And these particular nutrients called carotenoids only are produced in the plant to help the plant survive in difficult environments. So as soon as you make it easy for the plant to grow, it suppresses that. So like, I think there's data from the US Department of Agriculture now that shows that I think they use spinach as an example, but within 60 years, you would now have to have 53 bowls of spinach compared to 60 years ago to get the same nutritional value. So I'm not saying that nutrition is not important. That's the pillar of health. And, you know, I'm a parent, I have 2 young girls, and we all do our best to try and eat enough of these foods. But the reality is, for certain micronutrients like these carotenoids, these valuable nutrients of the brain, we're just not getting enough. And that's what's unique about this is new science. And I think one of the challenges is, like, you know, when you say, okay, well, how do we do it then? I'm not saying don't eat well, be healthy. That is the primary in any general health or even age-related chronic disease like Alzheimer's. We know that that's what we have to do better at. But what I'm also saying is we live in a time now where we're able to isolate the particular micronutrients that are in those plants and make them available. And the real important piece of this, compared to kind of classic medicine, which is like pharmaceutical, very expensive drugs and so on, with nutrition, it can be very much affordable. It's something that we can do. It doesn't have to be something that's out of reach. It's something that's within reach. And that's what, you know, we run a conference in Cambridge, the Bond conference, the Brain and Ocular Nutrition Conference. And we had a keynote speaker recently from the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, Dr. George Perry, who's one of the most published scientists in the area of Alzheimer's disease. And when Professor Mulcahy presented our work, he basically said what's amazing about this is that we've identified something that is effective in real time, and it's something that we can make available to society, to the masses as a whole. It's something that we should do. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, and I don't want to like present this as it's a cure for Alzheimer's or anything of the sort. It's not. The idea, the biologically plausible rationale and the evidence that we have, which is now accumulating, not just from Waterford, Ireland, but from all over the world, is that we can support the management of the disease and the symptoms of the disease. You know, what you would have experienced with your dad, you know, maybe let me ask you, like, did mood change, for example?
Yeah, I mean, all that loss we spoke about comes with frustration. And it's a downward spiral. Yeah. And if you could slow that process in any way for them and the people around them, you certainly would. Can it be taken as a preventative measure? Should you and I, with full cognitive ability, be taking this supplement to stave off Alzheimer's, or is that a different
No, it's exactly the point. So if you look at the trial that we did, it was in patients with early to moderate, so it was kind of that earlier stage of the disease anyway. That's where we went to. And then we looked at all different stages of the disease, but that's in the major Re-MIND trial. That's where we went to. But the whole concept of the work we've done is about your point. That's early prevention. Okay, and the reason being is our cells are vulnerable from the second that we're born. So when a retina is developing, that's the back of the eye, or when a brain is developing, it's dealing with this process known as oxidative stress, the cost of doing business with life, if you like. And what's really fascinating is, I'm often asked when I give these lectures, well, how early should we start doing this? And what I say is that, well, nature begins at the very beginning from the cradle. So as soon as a mother is breastfeeding, when you look at the colour of the breast milk, the colostrum, the yellow are these exact nutrients I'm speaking about, these VAT-soluble carotenoids. So we don't have these, and I don't believe that these type of supplements are just for the end stage, are just for people with age-related macular degeneration or Alzheimer's disease. I actually believe in this new world where we all live so much longer than we're supposed to, and we're also exposed to new environmental stresses like changes in nutrition, but also different lifestyles with exposures to light that we never had before. There has to be a counterbalance to that. And that's where quality, tested and safe, effective supplementation has a clear role to play.
Yeah, so that's one of my questions was, why is this not a medical, like a tablet? Why is this not a treatment? It's a nutritional supplement, because they're two very different things.
Absolutely. This is not a treatment per se. It lives within the world, as you say, of food supplements. And one of the challenges within food supplements, and it's something I'm committed to, is the whole quality piece around that. So I think, You know, we've often heard of food supplements referred to as snake oil, you know. And
that you pee most of them down the
and
toilet and you're wasting your money and you do have to be careful.
And some of them you absolutely do, okay? But the reality is what there has to be a change in kind of legislation, actually. And I'm actually I'm communicating and talking to the Department of Health and Food Supplements in terms of making this available for patients at risk of or with early stages of Alzheimer's disease. But the way we have to do that is to understand there has to be an evidence base, because doctors and patients and everyone should be informed by scientific evidence base. And then there has to be a quality piece. And what I want the government to do is to look at the evidence. We've spent €8 million in Waterford on this type of research from competitive research grants. And we've 110 plus scientific papers. And 20, 30 people have committed their full life careers to this, and we deliver this information. The next challenge is the dissemination, the use of that. And thankfully, you know, it has been made available, you know, via the Re-MIND supplement, which was used in the trial. So now doctors are recommending the Re-MIND supplement for patients with this, and that's a good thing. But I actually think we need to go a step further. I believe that, you know, we look at the cost of Alzheimer's disease. I think it's like for Ireland, it's 2 billion per year is what it costs. And there's no work being done in terms of that early intervention, that nutritional support. You know, we've known for a long time, Claire, that the Mediterranean diet, you know, reduces the risk of dementias, including Alzheimer's disease. So it's tapping into that knowledge and now looking at the specific science. So we have to change policy. We have to, and I'm not critical of medicine, by the way, you know, but these drugs are being used as a standard of care to kind of get rid of the proteins, these plaques and tangles that are produced at the end game. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we do know that they're not very effective, right? And
so why don't we change the conversation and get into preventative and doing that in different ways, including nutritional food supplements. John, I could literally talk to you all day because this is my jam within health and wellness. You'll have to come back and talk to us again.
Can I say one thing? I don't want to I think this is great news for carers, and I think this is as important because you're a carer. I'm speaking to a carer when I look at you, and you suffered. That's the point with Alzheimer's. It's not just the patient; it's the total family. So this is great news. I don't want to over sensationalise it by saying, "Look, there's a cure," or because sometimes with Alzheimer's people do that. But we should be very proud of this, and we should be very confident that there's something that is very effective and something that people can look to now to get some kind of support with this.
Yeah, you and your team should be very proud of the work that you did. And I'd say it was a fantastic day when you had the breakthrough and patented the product, and now it's being recommended by doctors. It is called Re-MIND. Professor John Nolan from the Nutrition Research Centre of Ireland, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much. Lovely speaking to you.